said last night, we have an amazing double header today. We have tons of information that we're going to be going through today, starting off with worker safety. And the origin of this is that the Regional Food System Partnership Grant that we have a cohort of 8 hubs that have been working on together to do some planning around all kinds of activities, but one of those activities was fair labor. And in the process of understanding fair labor, we realized that we as food hubs probably have some work to do when it comes to worker safety. And we went looking around to see if anybody had developed a worker safety program specific to food hubs. And holy cats, they had not. And we talked to AMS and we asked, did we miss anything? Agricultural Marketing Service at the USDA. Did we miss anything? Is there some publication that I haven't found in my vast internet trollings? And they confirmed that no, there were no publications that they had participated in. So we decided to make this happen for ourselves. And I was sort of in a, well, who do we talk to about this? And then I realized that my very old, very good friend, former colleague, Deb Bridges, is working with an organization called Safety Northwest, and that Deb would be the perfect person to help us develop a worker safety program specific to food hubs. Deb's background, she actually grew up in Southern Oregon, in Roseburg, has done a little farming of her own, has done a lot of food service of her own. And so she understands really, really well what we and our workers do on a daily basis. So it was an absolute pleasure to work with her on developing this program. We've created some resources together. And what we're going to do today is we're going to start off and Deb's going to talk us through safety programs. And then I will share the link of where we have now posted on our resource folder our worker safety programs that you all can take back into your hubs and start figuring out how to implement in your space. All right, Deb, all you.
I was going to say, if it's okay, I'd like to spend 5 minutes really quick and just give a couple network updates. Sorry, Deb. Yeah, hi everyone. So just 2 quick things that I want to call out before we pass this over to our experts in the room. One is that the OCFSN 2023 equity assessment is open. So that I linked in our agenda. All the questions are optional, and it is, wow, I'm losing the word for it. It is anonymous. So unless you want folks to reach out afterwards. And also, we just opened up registration for our first regional convening of the year, which will be up in the North Coast in Astoria with Yana and Andy and Twyla will be co-hosting with us. So we're really excited about that. So I will drop that in the agenda as well so folks can access that. So we hope to see y'all there. And then Deb, all you.
All right, thanks everyone. I'm really excited to be here today and to talk about safety because I'm a bit of a safety nerd, but also, again, I really appreciate the opportunity to work again with Sid, and then also to kind of help all of you develop your safety programs. And one of the things that I'll be doing is traveling around and visiting all of your locations and looking kind of at, what you guys are doing right now and sort of making some assessments, making some suggestions. But one thing I want to say right off the bat is I know a lot of times when we think about safety people, we think of nerds that are probably more nerdy than me, but also that they have clipboards and that they are like waggling their fingers at you and telling you what you should do and what you can and can't do. And that's really not what I will be there to do, and also really not what we're about. We're much more focused on meeting an organization wherever they are and helping them to get where they need to be. So that's kind of our goal. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if I have the ability to do so. Oh, look at that.
You should have.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see that okay. Thumbs up. Yeah.
Yep, it's looking good.
Awesome. All righty. So we're going to we'll spend the next few minutes talking about workplace safety. First of all, kind of wanted to talk a little bit about who we are, who Safety Northwest is. As Sid said, I did grow up in Roseburg and, spent, I didn't actually do personal farming, but I had a lot of friends who did farming and ranching, also was very active in FFA and 4-H when I was growing up. Learned to drive some pretty big and different types of equipment. And then I did a bunch of other stuff. I was a ski bum for a little while, did large scale reclamation and landscaping, and then ended up in food service and worked in food service for about 17 years. And that's where I worked with Sid, but I also spent some time serving, spent some time running restaurant facilities. So again, I feel like I have a really good handle on a lot of what you're doing, but I'm always super fascinated by what you all are doing. And I really appreciate all of what you're doing. It's such important work. So I know one of the first things I'll do when I do a visit is I want you to tell me about your organization and kind of what you have going on. So about Safety Northwest. We were founded roughly in 2000. We're located in Portland, Oregon. There's only 7 of us, so we're a small company, but we do Southern Oregon, we get out to Eastern Oregon, we do Southwest Washington, we've got a consultant in Seattle. So we kind of, we'll run the gamut of the whole state. But basically our goal is to help an organization either develop, or maybe we're going to support their safety program, or we're going to help to grow their safety program. And the things that we do are, we're going to assess and develop required and just basic safety programs, which is something that we've done for the food hubs. We also can provide safety training. We do assist with OSHA audits and OSHA preparations. We also assist with OSHA hearings for some of our folks who sometimes that's how we end up working with an organization. They'll call us and they're like, oh my God, OSHA was just here and I think we're going to get cited. We also help organizations try to figure out how they can reduce their workers' compensation costs. We assist with hazard identification and elimination, either through site visits or trainings. We also can participate in monthly safety meetings or safety committee meetings. And then we will also perform ergonomic assessments. And again, our goal is always to meet clients where they are and help them to figure out where they want to be and how we can get them there. We are perfectly fine with working ourselves out of a job. We're fine with that. We like to see the little birds fly away. So what does that mean? So basically, what I like to do is I spend a little bit of time talking about why safety is important. We're going to talk about, yes, we have to, but also it's really the right thing to do. And we'll talk quite a bit about that. We'll talk about what an effective safety program looks like. Then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about hazards that are at work, tasks and work areas. We'll talk about reporting injuries and illnesses, and then we'll kind of put it all together. So again, why is safety important? Well, safety is required, right? So basically what that means is, according to OSHA, employers are responsible for maintaining a safe work environment for their employees. And more specifically, there's a general duty clause that OSHA has that says employers shall, and whenever OSHA uses the word shall, what they mean is must. So whenever you see the word shall, just put must in there. So employers must furnish employment and a place of employment which is safe and healthful for employees, and they shall or must do every other thing reasonably necessary to protect the life, safety, and health of those employees. So sure, it's required. But more importantly, it's the right thing to do. Employees are a critical component of an organization. And in your situation, it could be employees and volunteers, right? We couldn't do what we're doing without employees. So whenever somebody gets hurt at work, the workplace suffers. The actual employee suffers, right? Because they have maybe a temporary or permanent disability. It also affects our workers' compensation costs. But the bigger thing is no one comes to work to get hurt. We typically come to work to do something that we enjoy doing. And we always want to leave work in the same vehicle that we came to work in, not in an ambulance, not in someone else's car taking us to the hospital, right? So nobody comes to work to get hurt. We also, statistically, a safe work environment, they have higher productivity, worker morale goes way up, and workers are much more involved. It's a much happier place to be, because when I feel safe at work, I know that my employer cares about me, and I know that I matter to them, right? So that makes me feel better. I want to be there. Now, volunteers are kind of in an interesting place. Volunteers are not covered by OSHA or by Oregon OSHA, but of course, we never want any of our volunteers to get hurt at work either. So, so we want to make sure that they are provided a safe and healthful work environment as well. So some of the goals of our safety program. So the big goal of any safety program is we want to figure out what hazards are in our workplace. We want to identify those hazards, and we want to correct those hazards. And basically, by identifying and correcting those hazards, we're going to prevent injuries and illnesses to all of our employees and to all of our volunteers. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we're going to have safety programs and policies. So those safety programs are the things that we have provided for you. But once we have those policies, we have to make sure that we're following the policies, right? We can't just have a piece of paper over here that says, oh, we have them, but we're not doing anything. So we also need to make sure that we're providing safety training and that we're educating our employees, right? Everybody knows the difference between education and training. Education means we're telling people why we do something. Safety training is how we do it specifically. We also might have things like safety data sheets. Those are those go with chemicals. We also have equipment operating manuals. So again, if we have any sort of equipment that we want to make sure that employees are trained how to use that equipment, particularly if it's something mechanical. I mean, I don't think any hand truck comes with a safety or an operating manual, but maybe it should. Ladders would be another one. So anytime our employees are using equipment, we want to make sure that they know how to operate or to use that equipment safely. We can also figure out our workplace hazards by doing workplace inspections, which is something I'm going to be doing, but also you should be doing workplace inspections periodically, any walkthroughs or safety meetings that you're doing. And a key thing to remember is that safety is not, we don't have safety culture over here and workplace culture over here. They're one and the same, right? Safety is part of our workplace culture. If we keep them separated, it doesn't work as well. And also, we can't have a strong safety culture if our work environment doesn't support it. So that's always really important as well. Okay, so we're going to spend a couple minutes looking at some photos that I have pulled up, because one thing that I always like to stress to people is we need to make sure that we never, ever, ever underestimate the ingenuity of human beings. If you give humans a task to do, they will figure out how to get it done. And sometimes it's not the safest way to get it done. So we need to, so there's some things that we need to do. So for example, this picture over here, ingenious, right? But not safe for many, many, many reasons. Not safe. But the problem is this individual does not have the equipment to reach their work area safely. They need a much, much bigger and taller scissor lift. They don't have it. So they figure out how to get it done. Not safe. Couple more, right? So here's another one. The top cap of the ladder is not a step. The second, this step right here, I like to call the naughty step. So neither of those steps should be used on a ladder. And the reason for that is that we're more likely to lose our balance. Okay, and then the last one is, and again, somebody doesn't have the right resources to be able to get that job done. So they use a forklift and stand on one of the forks of the forklift. So good employees will figure out how to get a job done. And we have to be careful that we don't reward good employees for doing a job where maybe they didn't quite do it in the safest way. Okay, now we're going to talk about this guy for a minute. So it might be a little bit difficult to tell exactly what this guy's doing, but he is using an abrasive wheel to either cut or grind something. Now, typically when we cut or grind something, what do we need to be doing? We need to be wearing safety glasses, right? Or a safety shield or face shield. Minimally safety glasses, face shield would be even better. My guess is that this individual does not have safety glasses or a safety shield, a face shield, sorry. So what do? They know that they should need to cover their eyes and protect their eyes. So they find something and they put it over their head, which is a bag. So what this individual has done is he's trying to do the right thing, but he doesn't have the right resources. So he does something that potentially is more hazardous. He puts a bag over his head. So this is what we want to make sure that we do not do. We do not want to put our employees or our volunteers in a situation where they don't have the proper resources or the proper leadership or the proper oversight or the proper support, right? What we don't want is whenever employees are, what I want you to think about, if you see an employee doing something that's not safe, think, oh, they're putting a bag over their head, right? So we need to make sure we give them the proper training, proper personal protective equipment, with the proper equipment for the job. We need to make sure that we are always leading by example. So we're not putting a bag over our head. We're not taking shortcuts. We're not standing on something that we shouldn't be standing on. We also want to make sure that we're giving them the proper oversight. If we see unsafe behavior, we want to correct that behavior in a very caring way. It's like, hey, you know what? You know, I don't want you to fall off that ladder. I don't want you to fall off that step stool. You probably shouldn't turn that crate upside down and use it as a step stool. Let's get a real step stool because I don't want you to slip and fall, right? It's you're coming from a place of I care about you and I don't want you to get hurt at work. Encourage your team to correct each other and to reward that safe behavior. And then again, we want to make sure that we're supporting employees. So we want to encourage them to report. We want to encourage them to figure out how we can mitigate hazards, how we can collaborate to make the workplace safer. We want to solicit feedback, concerns, questions, and get them to share. Hey, what works? What doesn't work? How can we fix this? How can we make it better? How can we make this more safe? So some common workplace hazards that we're going to see, and these are common not only to what I've seen already in the food hubs, but also common to a lot of workplaces. So strains and sprains, and we'll talk about each one of these individually, but strains and sprains, equipment can cause hazards, slips, trips, and falls, repetitive motion injuries, vehicles and driving, emergency response, and others, chemicals, forklifts, electric pallet jacks. I realize a lot of people don't currently have forklifts and electric pallet jacks, but you might at some point. So strains and sprains are typically caused by doing lifting, a lot of lifting, particularly if we are not lifting properly, or we're doing a lot of twisting and moving incorrectly when we're lifting. Also a lot of overhead work. So we're spending a lot of time up here doing this, or awkward postures. Poor ergonomics can also lead to strain and sprain hazards. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about ergonomics when we talk about repetitive motion injuries. Poor ergonomics typically is when we're working a little bit too far away from the body, or we're working in awkward postures again. The way that we prevent strains and sprains is using proper lifting techniques, improving ergonomics in our workplace, making sure that we're storing heavy items properly. We want to keep heavy items stored between the shoulders and the knees. We don't want them up here, and we don't want to be getting them off the floor. Anti-fatigue mats can also help with strains and sprains, especially if you're working on hard floors or concrete floors. And also pre-shift or task-specific stretching can also help with that. Equipment hazards. So any pallet jacks that we might have, manual or electric pallet jacks, hand trucks. Again, I don't think hand trucks come with operating manuals, but sometimes I think they should. People need to understand how to use hand trucks properly. Especially when they're moving heavy loads and opening up doors and things like that, going up and down curbs potentially. Power tools, if you have those, any sort of ladders. And one thing I'm going to say about ladders is ladders account for 48% of all injuries that are reported to OSHA. So if an injury is reported to OSHA, it typically means that someone spent the night in the hospital, or there was a fatality. Those are two. So 48%. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that ladders are used incorrectly. So if you have ladders in your place, in your food hub, it's important to make sure that employees know how to use those ladders safely, because not everyone uses a ladder safely. Again, the way that we prevent injuries from equipment is proper training. Equipment should not be used until the training is complete, and make sure all training is documented. Make sure we're inspecting equipment. Is it safe to use? And then make sure we're using proper PPE if that's required. Slips and falls. So first of all, let's talk about a slip versus a trip. So a slip is when our foot loses traction, causing a loss of balance. Typically, a slip means we fall backwards. Usually it's water, food, grease, oil, ice, soap, debris, anything on the floor causes a slip. A trip is when our foot strikes something which causes a loss of balance, typically tipping us forward. So it might be a cord, might be a change in elevation, could be an open drawer or something sticking out, obstructed view, low light. And the way that we prevent both of those is good housekeeping, making sure we're cleaning up spills, keeping hallways clear of potential tripping hazards. If we do have cables, hoses, or cords across walkways, we want to cover those or tape them down. Also putting signage out for a wet floor, cleaning it up, and then keep working areas and hallways well lit. So now we'll talk a little bit more about repetitive motion. So when it comes to repetitive motion, typically there are three stressors that are going to cause musculoskeletal disorders, which are another type of strains and sprains. And it's typically force, frequency, and posture. So what we want to try and do when we're improving ergonomics is we want to try and change one of those sides of the triangle. So we want to reduce the force, we want to improve the posture, or we want to reduce frequency. And any one of those things can help to reduce the likelihood of repetitive motion injuries. So if you have people who are doing the same task over and over and over, or for a longer period of time, and if, let's say, you add in poor posture, more likely for them to have a repetitive motion injury. But if you can reduce one of those things, maybe you improve posture, or maybe you have them take breaks, or maybe you have them rotate jobs, that's going to help to reduce those repetitive motion injuries. Keeping work close to the body is really important. I kind of talked about the micro breaks, and again, pre-task or pre-shift stretching. Here's a couple really good graphics that kind of talk about potential strains and sprains that can happen. So when we think about our lower back and the way that we lift and how we lift, it can really change the amount of pressure that's placed on the lower back. So when we stand upright and we lift 20 pounds and we're keeping it super close to the body, then we kind of stay in that, moderate to low range for injury. The minute we pick something up and move it away from the body, so I'm now looking at this one here, we move it away from the body, it increases the pressure on the lower back. If we're bending over and we're lifting, right, that can also be a problem. And then if we, again, get farther away from the back and we're bent over, more pressure. So it's just really keeping things as close to the body as much as possible. And the next two graphics kind of show that that sort of a green zone or a good zone for ergonomics. So we want to keep our work in that green zone. So you can see both from above and then in front. We want to kind of keep it right close to the body. If we start doing a lot of reaching, and we do that a lot, that's where we're going to start to get strain on the shoulders. So hopefully those graphics help a little bit. Let's talk about distracted driving a little bit and vehicle and driving hazards in general. So distracted driving, there are three kinds. There's visual, which basically means anything that takes our eyes off the road. There's manual, which means anything that takes our hands off the wheel. 1 or 2. Cognitive is the other one. So anytime that takes our mind off the road. So we want to be keeping our eyes on the road, keeping our hands on the steering wheel, and keeping our mind on what we're doing. Remember also, when we're driving, there are road hazards. Might be construction, might be wildlife, might be road conditions, might be pedestrians, might be, almost anything. We also need to be thinking about what happens if we do have an injury or we have an accident. What do we do for property damage? What do we do for injuries or accidents? And this is another program that we will be providing you. What is our accident kit? Like, what do we do? What forms do we need to fill out? And how do we prevent some of these things? Is we want to minimize distracted driving as much as possible. So I just talked about taking our eyes off the road, taking our hand off the road, taking our mind off the road. So what is the number one thing that does all 3 of those things at once? Our phone. Here it is, right? That's why texting can be so dangerous, because we're not looking at the road, we're looking at our phone. We have one hand on the phone, or maybe 2, and we're also not thinking about the road. So if you need to make a call, or you need to take a call, or you need to text, pull over. That's the safest thing to do. If you have any adjustments, make those adjustments prior to driving. Mirrors, food, your coat, put it on, take it off, whatever. Also, as an employer, you should avoid calling or texting your employees and volunteers while they're driving. So again, setting that good example. Emergency hazards. This is all about emergency response. What are employees supposed to do if and when there's an emergency? They need to know how to respond to that emergency, when to evacuate, how to get out of your facility, where they're supposed to assemble, and when it might be safe to go back into the building. Some common things, common preventative measures, making sure that we have fire extinguishers, that we're maintaining and checking fire extinguishers, that we're conducting an annual fire drill. We want to make sure that we're preventing the accumulation of flammable or combustible waste materials. We also want to watch for electrical hazards. I spent time talking about extension cord use and daisy chaining. Also making sure that people are trained, right? Again, we can have a program on it, but if people don't know what to do, then it's not as effective. And then let's spend some time discussing with our team what are potential emergencies that we might have, and make sure that we've developed and trained on those responses. Other hazards, we might have chemical hazards. So basically what we want to do is we want to look at chemicals that are present in our workplace. So if we have household chemicals in household quantities, and we are using them per the manufacturer's recommendations, we typically don't need SDS sheets on them. But if you have a chemical and you have a lot of it, even if it's a household chemical, or employees are using it more than they would in their own home, then we may want to have SDS sheets on those. So you would need to do a hazard communication if needed, and you would want to put together a safety data sheet book. Other ones, forklifts. So if you end up with forklifts or pallet jacks in your facility, understand that they do require certification, and that certification consists of a classroom portion and a performance portion. Employers are really the only ones who can certify forklift operators, but the whole point of the standard is you're determining whether or not an individual is competent enough to operate a forklift in your facility. Same thing with pallet jacks. If you have someone who is trained on a forklift, they're not automatically trained on a pallet jack, and vice versa. They're 2 different things. You got to make sure that people are certified on each piece of equipment. Also be thinking about, as your organization grows or changes, that you may have new hazards or introduced hazards. So if you get any new equipment or new processes, then we have to retrain on that piece of equipment or those processes. We get a new vehicle, we get anything that's new, we have to make sure that any new chemical, we would need to train on that new hazard. So as I start to wind up, I always like to talk about, how do we keep safety fresh? Meaning, how do we keep it in, kind of forefront and in people's minds all the time? You know, all of us get distracted, or we get busy, or things are happening, and we may not be thinking about safety as much as we should. So what I try to remind people is plan your work with safety in mind. So again, don't put employees or volunteers in a position to take shortcuts or to get the job done. You know, we don't want them to be in that spot where they feel like they got to get it done. We need to model safe behavior and be sure that we're correcting any unsafe behaviors or unsafe actions. We also want to make sure that people are recording incidents and near misses. So accidents have to be reported. So anytime somebody needs medical attention beyond first aid, that has to be reported, especially if they're an employee. It's required. But we also want to encourage employees to report any sort of near miss. If they had a slip, if they had a trip, if they almost had something happen in the van, if they you know, anything that was kind of close. Ooh, that you know, I was lucky that time. That could have been worse. We want to report those because those are opportunities for us to correct hazards. Maybe that was a hazard we didn't realize. You know, so those are sort of those opportunities. I would say big or small, report them all. So those near misses can help us to improve our program. Remember to hold people accountable, again, in a very caring sort of a way, but just kind of remember that working safely, being safe at work is also part of their job, just like everything else they're doing. And that's true for both employees and for volunteers. And again, remember that at the end of the day, we want everyone to go home safely. Nothing, and I'll stress this a million times, nothing we do at work is ever worth getting hurt over. All of us have things that we're doing outside of work that are super important, and we want to be able to continue to do those. And that, oh, sorry, a couple more slides. Almost forgot this one. So your safety programs, they are provided by us. They're going to provide a framework for your safety program. I know Sid and I were talking about them this morning, and she's got them in a folder. So everybody will need to really have their injury and illness prevention program, emergency response, hazard communication if you need it, safe lifting kind of is also under the injury and illness prevention program, and then bloodborne pathogens. It's a non-occupational bloodborne pathogens. And then also in the state of Oregon, obviously heat illness and wildfire smoke. And then also if you find that you have powered industrial trucks or forklifts, pallet jacks are also in there, you would grab that program as well. We'll also be conducting site visits to evaluate current and potential hazards. I'll be spending some time with each of you at your food hub talking about safety. We're here to provide training and to be a resource, so feel free to reach out to us if you need any of those things. And again, we're really here to support the safety program and to support you. That is my last slide. It looks like, oh, I see stuff in the chat.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions in the chat, and I'm going to do a quick clarification. Deb has mentioned a couple times coming out and to see everybody, and the Regional Food System Partnership Grant contracted with Deb to come out and see the 8 food hubs that are a part of that cohort. I dropped a note earlier in the chat. If you are a hub that has not been contacted by Deb already and you really would like to have a site visit or you feel ready for such a thing, please talk to me, reach out to me by email, and we can see if we can find some funding to make that happen for hubs that are outside of that cohort. Deb, this is the full the full Megillah of folks, so you're talking to a broader audience.
Got it.
And then there's already a couple of questions in the chat. There was one from me about who is the certifying body? Where do you get certified for things like pallet jacks and forklifts? And then there's a question about reporting, you know, near misses. When you were talking about reporting, I think it was a little unclear to a bunch of us.
Okay. Sorry, I'm looking at the chat. Orchard ladders. Yep. Sorry, I just saw the one about the hand truck almost knocking them. Yes. Yes, agreed. I love all of you. You know what I should have done? I should have like paused and we could have talked about all those workarounds. Sorry.
Water for your next one.
Yeah. Oh, I've been washing eggs for 6 hours so far today. Yeah, that's a great example of potential for repetitive motion. And there are some great hand stretches for stuff like those. Computers. Yeah. Aaron can tell you all about what happens with distracted driving. Oh, everyone's okay. Okay. How do we get, okay, so basically when it comes to forklift certifications or pallet certifications, interestingly enough, the way that Oregon OSHA looks at that is the employer is really the only one who can give those certifications. So we can do sort of the train the trainers sessions. If you have someone on your staff who is an experienced forklift driver, that person could potentially become someone who might be able to certify people. If you get a forklift and you don't have anybody who knows how to drive the forklift, then sometimes an option may be to reach out to a company that teaches people how to drive, which they do exist. But again, once the operator comes back to your facility, you would then assess their performance to make sure that they are able to operate that forklift in your facility. And the reason why OSHA does that is because what they're looking at is or basically the idea is that the employer is the only one who knows the hazards that exist in their facility. So they're the only one who are truly qualified to sort of deem that operator competent. It's a competency-based standard. So, and otherwise, I mean, in the forklift program that we do have kind of the sample quiz and a sample operating or performance checklist and things like that. So hopefully that kind of.
Yeah, I don't think there's any forklifts out there, but I do know that there are some pallet jacks in some of our facilities. Is the pallet jack program, is it the same?
Same, yeah. So,
okay.
So basically, someone who's experienced in operating the pallet jack would then train new people, and they would sort of say, this is how you operate that thing quickly. Now show me, this is how you operate it safely. Now show me that you can operate it safely. So you're going to do a little bit of classroom, and I'm going to put that in air quotes because it's not as much classroom typically as a forklift, but you would kind of go over the education piece and the training piece, right? You're going to educate, this is why we operate the pallet jack. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to show you exactly how to do it.
Cool. Then there was a question about reporting.
Oh, near misses. So near misses would be reported internally, and typically they're just going to stay internal. We have in the injury and illness prevention program, there is an accident incident form. You could use the same form for both, although a lot of organizations will use a simpler form for reporting near misses or incidents, just because there's a whole investigation piece on that accident investigation form that you sometimes don't have to do for incidents. I will argue that if you have an incident that could have been serious or more serious, then I always encourage those to be investigated as well, because that was truly a near miss that could have been a lot worse. So that's an opportunity sometimes to put some systems in place. But if it's just, oh, I, bumped myself on the table, I would still report it, but it's more simple. Hopefully that answers that one. Yep.
Yeah. So when we're required to report, to be clear, when we're required to report, it's when somebody to OSHA, it's when somebody is injured in such a way that they need medical attention. Is that correct? Is that the correct?
So if you have an injury or an accident where the individual gets medical beyond first aid, so they go to the doctor, typically. Mm-hmm. That needs to be reported to your workers' compensation provider.
Okay.
The only thing that needs to be reported to OSHA is if you have, if you have a fatality, so let's hope that never happens, or, and that's within 8 hours, or you have someone who spends the night in the hospital, or they have an amputation, avulsion, or eye injury. Those have to be reported within 24 hours to OSHA.
Great, thank you. Were there some other questions that showed up in here?
Yep, Laura said we used Overton safety training. Overton does a great job. Laura, thank you for that. Yep, that's kind of who I was thinking of as well. Carrie says, I provide my own tractor safety training with my employees, but Shemetka Community College has perfect. Delivery vehicle training. So Marissa, that is typically going to come from the employer. Like I mentioned, we're also putting together a vehicle or a fleet program, and we'll have some good tips in there for helping to train drivers on how to drive safely, good practices, vehicle inspections, things like that. Oh, Sid, you already answered that. Oh, thank you. Volunteers do not, no, they don't fall under workers' compensation requirements. That list, Yana, was amputation, eye injury, and avulsion is the other one, which avulsion is typically the loss of skin, but not bone.
And we have a question from Andy as well.
Yes.
Hey, Deb, thank you. Following up on the certification of, say, like an electric pallet jack, we will have at some future date, we'll have producers coming in, and if they want to move their own product in our storage facility, would you recommend the full certification kind of training of an electric pallet jack, or is there some sort of distinction between an employee who uses it daily and a producer who has to move their product once a month or something like that? Is there any gradation of certification, I guess?
Yep. So in OSHA's eyes, you are not really responsible for the producer because that individual doesn't work for you, right? The producer doesn't work for you. Yeah.
Right.
So OSHA isn't necessarily going to look for their certification. Now, let's say something happened, then they might dig a little bit deeper. So probably what I would do in that situation is just confirm that they're comfortable using the electric pallet jack and that they are familiar with the controls of your particular, they're not that different, but I would just make sure that they're kind of oriented to your pallet jack, and then just talk about any safety, just general safety stuff that you have. I think that would kind of cover you there. I don't think you necessarily have to see their certification card or anything like that. Just that touch base.
Okay. Thank you.
Any others? I think I'm finally getting caught up in the chat. Sorry about that. I should have just told you guys to interrupt me.
I have one question.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, it kind of sounds like there's differences between OSHA standards and like insurance standards, right? Like if you had producers on site and they got injured with your equipment, like that seems like an insurance agency might be like, it was on your property, like you didn't have them sign a form, that kind of thing. But like OSHA wise, you're saying that since they're not an employee, just clear, like,
yep,
are those two really different worlds, and you kind of have to figure out?
They definitely can be. Your insurer is always going to be, for them, it's going to be about liability, as you were saying. So typically they are going to be just like, and remember that OSHA, any of their standards are the minimum. So that's the minimum that you have to do. We always encourage people to do more than the minimum. So that's why I think with that producer, it's important to kind of have that conversation and, touch base and make sure that you're comfortable with them using your piece of equipment. Because again, if something were to happen, you know, OSHA may say one thing, but your insurance company might be like, what were you thinking? So I don't know if that kind of helps, but yeah.
We have time for one or two more questions if there's any other questions lingering out there.
Great questions.
Are there any other questions that have showed up? This presentation will be available with our notes. And again, I dropped it in the chat earlier, but we'll add a link to the notes as well with where the folder is. It exists on the Oregon Community Food Systems Network website. All of these materials that Deb referenced exist in that folder. There is a Food Hubs Worker Safety Program Getting Started folder that you will start there. There's a document in there that will walk you through, to some extent, how to start building your program. If you come across any equipment or a situation that you don't see applicable materials for in that folder and you want some help sourcing materials, again, please let me know and I can work with Deb on adding materials to that folder if we're missing anything. We might be missing pallet jack and lift gate. I realized as we were talking, and some of us are using those things. So again, we'll keep adding to that folder until we feel that we've got it all covered. There's some upside down milk crates that are stealthily being removed from a hub as we speak. Debbie, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge and experience with us. It's been a super pleasure to have you here today. I appreciate it. And you're welcome to stay and listen about SNAP if you want to, or you are welcome to return to your regularly scheduled life.
Yeah, I have to go to another meeting here in a minute. So take care, everyone. Thank you. I appreciate your time and attention, and please reach out if you have any questions or need anything. So
thank you so much, Deb.
See you later.
All right, we are moving on towards SNAP. Bryan is here to talk us through some of our problems. Earlier in the month or last month, I asked y'all to let me know what your problems look like. And I, sanitized the information and sent it over to Bryan so that he could have a running start on what we're talking about here. Bryan, what would be the best way to get this started for you? Do you want to just launch into it based on what was there? Or do you want to pull those questions up? How do you want to do it?
Yeah, maybe I can just quickly address the questions and then people can ask me more specific questions. Does that sound
sure?
Like follow-up question?
And if you could introduce yourself and let us know who you are and what you do and all that good stuff, that'd be great.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Bryan. I'm an attorney in recovery. I've been farming for the past 12 years at Zenger Farm in Southeast Portland. Done a lot of work with getting CSA farmers accepting SNAP payment. And I'm the SNAP manager at the Portland CSA Coalition. So I wrote a guide about, for CSA farmers to accept SNAP. So I got all of your questions ahead of time, and just a few things that I was wanting to mention is that, so you can apply as a farm direct retailer, which would be like a farmer, or a brick and mortar store. And I think for all of your situations, you all want to be brick and mortar stores. Both because you want to in the future accept SNAP online, but also because there's one of you that is I forget the name of it, but a coalition of farmers, a co-op or something like that. The more normal you can make yourself look, the easier this is going to be. So just want to try to look at like a brick and mortar business. And so the Oregon Department of Ag is the one that you work with when it's a brick and mortar application, but the USDA is actually the one that approves farm direct sales, farmers. So I saw that somebody got their application transferred over to a brick and mortar, but that basically means you start from the beginning with the ODA. So just FYI. There's no rules for online SNAP sales yet. So we really can't say how best to position yourself or what you should be doing. What we can say is you just want to look as much as a brick and mortar store as possible. So somebody mentioned they moved. Yes, it's since the beginning of SNAP, your application is tied to your physical address. And if you open like another branch or your business moves, you have to reapply, just how SNAP is. You know, we can talk more about the stock items. I should just, you know, there's a decent guide about the categories that you need to fill for online retailers, or sorry, brick and mortar retailers. So I just pasted the link there. You know, it's easier for farmers because as long as you're selling stuff that you grow, you really don't have to meet these categories at all. But just be aware that there's so many gas stations that meet these criteria just because, you know, they have a can of tomatoes on the shelf. So now they have an additional vegetable. So I just really encourage all of you to like look at the categories and stock something that may not be in line with your values, but it gets you approved to accept SNAP. Yeah. And then the hours of operation that you're going to list are basically the hours that your food is being delivered, like if you're doing a delivery, or that it's available for pickup. I know that people can place orders online 24/7, but you're really only in operation when the food is available. So that will make your applications and your, you know, the inspection way easier, because then folks will be showing up when you're actually have some food to show them. You know, and the agents that you interact with, they're really just trying to tick the boxes. So I really wouldn't read too much into your experience with the agents. There were farmers, you know, farmers used to go through the ODA. And so I've heard a lot of stories from older farmers or farmers who have been in operation for longer, you know, dealing with agents, and they really just want to take that photo so they can cover their butts when, you know, their supervisor makes sure that they're approving stores correctly. So, I mean, those were the main points that I wanted to make. And so I'm guessing people have follow-up questions. Somebody's asking, or Cindy, you said the difference between brick and mortar. I meant like a brick and mortar retailer versus a farmer. And there is no definition right now for an online retailer. It's, you know, they have a pilot program going on, but it has no rules published. So we have no idea really what the criteria are going to be like, besides those who are going through the process, interacting with the agents that are drafting the rules.
So brick and mortar, when you say brick and mortar, the category that these folks would be applying, you're recommending that they apply under is retailer. So if they have an online marketplace, you know, wipe your thinking about online marketplace. You are a retailer who is, you know, doing all these activities on specific days, and these are your hours.
Exactly.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple of other questions from, it looks like Shelly has a couple questions in there, and then Carrie.
You know, really the boxes to tick off are, it really is just the stocking foods in the different staple food categories for that link that I listed. There's no rule that I'm aware of that you have to be open during certain hours or a minimum number of hours. And then the other issue is like sales. So I think most of you, this is not going to be an issue for you because you're not primarily selling hot food, or you're not primarily, you know, I don't know, selling swag or something that is not edible. But as long as 50% of your sales are, you know, like grocery store items, then you should be fine. So, yeah. And then the others are identity and the business license. And I really can't, I'm not, you know, I can't really speak somebody had like a comment about them having issues with their verifying their identity. In my experience, driver's license was sufficient, and that's what I've heard from other folks. I know when you get into, you know, a corporation with a board of directors, for instance, then you do need to provide identity documents for the the president and the treasurer. And then you need to have your, what is it called? Your, like your incorporation documents, and provide that. And then, and then the business license, exactly. What they are looking for to meet this criteria of business license is that the state is recognizing you in some form. So there is nothing written in the rules saying that it has to be a certain type of a license. So in the past, it's worked. You know, if you have a scale that's certified by the state, you can have your scale license. If your business is like a corporation that's registered with the state, you should be able to just print off your registration, you know, and the expiration date from the Oregon Secretary of State website, and submit that. Yeah.
Okay, so.
Well, a farmer's, yeah. I guess if somebody wants to speak more about why they think that they fit in the farmer's market category, because I just think it'll be a lot easier if you go the retailer route. Unless you're actually hosting people who are, you know, physically coming to your location and staffed by the separate farms, which I don't think is what's actually going on.
Bryan, this is Carrie. That was my question. Yeah, so I halfway filled out both applications and got hung up on both because when I did I feel like we are at online farmers market and often am referred to that under some scenarios, and yet it did ask for the personal information of every single board member, not just president and treasurer. It wanted like date of birth, address, and social security number of every single board member. And so I stopped that one, and then I switched over to retailer and I got hung up again, but I can't remember why. There was another hiccup that it just seemed like didn't apply directly to our online marketplace scenarios. So I wasn't able to complete the application process.
Yeah. So the, you know, the actual rules that they have published, a farmer's market is a physical location where vendors come and it's staffed by the individual vendor. So you don't fit that definition. And they don't have a definition for an online marketplace. So you have to, like, your option is to pick the retailer. And so you just want to, every time you're thinking about meeting one of the criteria or answering one of the application questions, you just want to pretend like you're a retailer that's open when your food is available for pickup or delivery. It does ask for,
okay, thanks.
you have to provide the the date of birth and so on that you're saying, but in my experience, the only like documents that you have to provide to support that is for the president and the treasurer. So you supply the information, but it's only verified with documents for the president and the treasurer.
Okay.
There's a couple of questions in the chat. One about you know, what happens when your board members change, you know, if you're needing to provide that documentation. And then the other was if there's a difference in requirements between Oregon and Washington. One of the hubs present on the call is in Vancouver.
Yeah, there shouldn't be a difference in the requirements because it's a federal program. It's going to be administered by the state, but your experience should be very similar. And then, the application to be approved for SNAP is like a snapshot in time. So it's not like when your board changes in the future, you'll need to supply additional documentation. I suppose if you have like the president changes, then and you haven't supplied, the license or whatever it is that you're supplying to support what you've said, then you might need to update it with the agent that you're interacting with.
What other questions are out there?
I have a question about transitioning from a farm direct retailer to a brick and mortar. I am a farm direct marketing. I'm a direct marketing farmer, and I run an online food hub underneath the same tax ID. So it was really challenging for the USDA to understand my business type, especially the fact that I'm kind of doing those two things, farm direct marketing and online or brick and mortar activities that are online. So I did create operating hours for our brick and mortar. And but when the reviewer came, they were really just not seeing what they're used to seeing. It was abnormal. It looked more like a farm stand. So my question is, I've never heard of the OD, like working with the ODA on this before. So how do I, can I contact them to help with this? And also, is there a process to transition from being that farm direct marketer to the brick and mortar?
Yeah, I'm not certain about, because you're using the same tax ID number, what the situation is for that. Either way, you're going to have to start a new application, but I was going to say, like, the easiest way to do it would be if your farm direct activities were under your social, as an individual. And my understanding is that the agents that come, our ODA agents, the reviewers that come, so it's just administered by the state. And so there are folks to get in contact with. I haven't, the ones that I knew have retired now. But yeah, the more you explain, like, the worse the process is going to be. It's just that you really just want to say, yep, all these products are, from different farmers. I know it looks like a farm stand, but it's actually just a really beautiful store. And you just got to put it in that lens, because that's the lens that they're looking into. So and the more you explain about online ordering, the more questions it causes. It's the same for farmers that are going through this process. Like, the more that they explain that it doesn't fit into the typical farm stand mold, the worse it's going to be. So
is the application portal the same? So when I applied, okay, so it's the same. At what point does it split off from an ODA versus their like contractors?
It's all really the only point at which you interact with ODA is when the reviewer comes. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Got a question from Twyla in the chat about
somebody check Twyla. Yeah. The ODA is for retailers, brick and mortar stores. But like I said, I don't have the contact info of the current folks there. I only have folks that have retired, because basically I haven't had a use to interact with them anymore, since the USDA is doing all of the Farm Direct certification. Somebody says they checked the delivery route box. Yeah, that's interesting because there are separate rules for delivery routes. It's pretty antiquated. I would have to review those rules to like give you any guidance, but I would encourage you to change it to be a retailer and not a reroute. This is like way back. I don't know. I'm thinking of like an I Love Lucy episode, where the grocer like goes on a route and delivers your groceries to you every week. It really was something they were trying to accommodate old business models that used to stick around like from the 60s and 70s. And the reviewers are not going to be familiar if you check a delivery route. So you should really try to look like a retailer.
Bryan, if these guys, is it correct? Did I hear you say that if they are getting SNAP as a retailer, that better positions them for whenever the mysterious whenever that online processing will occur, that will occur in this retailer category first. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding. And the way that it is most likely to play out is that there will be certain payment processors that are allowed to accept online SNAP payments. And then you would choose to work with a certain processor, or the state would contract with a single processor, and that's the one that you work with. And yeah, I assume at the same point they will create a category for solely online retailers, but you're just going to be way better positioned if you're already approved as a brick and mortar retailer. And I assume that you wouldn't even have to reapply, like you would just be able to get this payment processor. So
what other questions?
It seems like some of you are trying to participate in the like pilot project, and so I don't have any advice for that, but it sounds like it's going to be a lot of work. So we're just, the CSA coalition is just going to wait until it becomes widely available, because it'll just be so much easier to go that route.
Are there other questions out there? Have we covered what needs covering? I know SNAP's been really hard for everybody. Did we get it?
I have one.
I don't know who went first there. You guys are going to have to sort it out yourselves.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, I'm jumping in. So after, we get over the hurdle of being eligible to accept SNAP, a question I would like to pose to you, Bryan, and the whole group is how to like physically then accept those payments when you're not actually a brick and mortar, even though you're pretending to be. Having like we have 6 different pickup locations currently. That'll probably increase, all happening. Like people are picking up at different locations at the same time, and having a SNAP machine on site charged with all the like materials and paper and blah, blah, isn't feasible, both price wise and just like logistically. And so the only kind of hack I've been able to come up with is those like offline payment slips, and somehow like getting those sent back to headquarters to run over the phone. And I'm just wondering how people have hacked that.
Yeah, so I think we talked on the phone a little while ago, but I would recommend using those offline payment vouchers. And because the other option is to get, 6 wireless terminals, which I assume would be cost prohibitive. So the offline payment vouchers, you know, there's a spot in there for you to write down their Oregon Trail card number and, you know, for them to sign and the payment amount. Call it in to FNS. There's a automated hotline, and you enter in, you know, their EBT card number and your SNAP approved vendor number and the payment amount, and then it verifies that there's funds. And then several days later, you can go online and clear those transactions. So you can actually run their card ahead of time before the food is picked up or delivered. And that's the route that I would recommend going until online sales are an option.
Bryan, Christy and Sue, I see both of you, but I'm gonna chase this relevant set of questions that are showing up in the chat down first, which is that there's a conversation about not being able to use vouchers on a regular basis. And do you have any knowledge about that? Because these guys would be using vouchers, you know, every week, several of them.
So you can use vouchers on a regular basis, but if you call up FNS or ODA, then they're going to tell you you can't. So, but you can. Like, there's nothing in the rules that say that you can't use them on a regular basis. The whole reason why vouchers exist is because, you know, making provisions for these businesses that weren't typical brick and mortar, when a food stamp paper, like it used to be a paper coupon, turned into a swiping card. And so the whole reason why they exist is so that non-conforming businesses can still accept SNAP. And also when the terminal goes down. But now they say it's just because the terminal goes down, but that's not true. So they're just wrong. Yeah, total pay is, you know, like an alternate, right? Total pay is like where you can use your iPhone, but you still have a swiping machine. I can't remember. Either way, you still have to have like the accessory that fits on your phone or your own swiping machine. And so having to have 6 of them is cost prohibitive.
Christy, you had a question, and then Sue, and then I think Marissa, unless yours got answered.
I don't have any questions, but I'm interested in, I guess I'm disagreeing on a couple points. So I just was going to, you know, Food Roots got in trouble for using paper vouchers too often. So anyway, I just, I've had a different experience on a couple levels.
Yeah. I'm just curious, you know, I've gotten in trouble too, but then I quote the rules back to them and I'm not in trouble. So, you know, there's actually getting in trouble where you're violating the rules, and then there's getting in trouble where the agent says that you're doing something that you're not supposed to and they're wrong. And whenever there's a situation like this where we're not fitting neatly within the mold, the agents are just often wrong, and they tell you can't do it, but you actually can. Or, you know, there's like documents that FNS has published that says that you can't do it, except that they haven't changed the rules. So their documents are wrong. Like, there's just a lot of misinformation, and what you have to go to is the Federal Register where the rules are listed. And so all the advice I'm giving you is from the Federal Register.
That's helpful clarification. Sue?
Yeah, hi. So I'm just starting out in the process of building out my business, and I was just wondering if you have any advice for someone in terms of setting up my business so that I can make it easier for me to accept SNAP, because that's a big part of what I'd like to be able to do.
Just, I guess I would say, like, whatever form your business takes, corporation or co-op, like the more typical you look, the easier it is. And then, you know, when you start a business, even when you like immediately open up a gas station, for instance, the gas station isn't going to open its gates being a SNAP approved retailer. They have to go through the process once they're actually in business.
Sure.
So I don't have any specific advice, but I could help you, you know, answer some questions if you run into hurdles.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Marissa.
Hi, guys. Sorry, it's during my store pickup hours, so I've been in and out a little bit. I wanted to clarify on some of the offline vouchers because Food Root, since we reopened our online store at a new location, we've been doing SNAP deliveries and exclusively relying on the offline voucher system to pay for these deliveries. And so far, it's been smooth sailing. I can't speak to Christy, us getting in trouble for using it too much. That may have been before my time. It is a long process. And I did talk to a USDA rep about this when I was setting up the program, and she never said, it seemed like her biggest barrier when we were trying to communicate and I was trying to figure out if this is allowed or not, was she just couldn't quite understand the concept of giving people food without having confirmation of payment. That was her biggest barrier. And I was like, if we accept the risk or we give people food and they may not have the money on their SNAP card, is that allowed? And she obviously said yes. So I just wanted to throw that in the mix. Definitely would love to keep updated on this status if it ever changes, because it's the sole reason why we're able to deliver to our SNAP customers right now their food. So we are definitely invested in the voucher program.
Thanks, Marissa, for that set of clarifications. I remember when this was happening with, I think it was Kaylin, and what you're describing is very similar to what I remember. So that may have been a conflation that occurred. I'm not sure where the wires got crossed on that, but thank you for sharing your experience with it. We have another question from Carrie, and we probably have time for maybe 2 more questions before we'll need to let Bryan fly and be free.
Yeah, Carrie, SNAP can't be used for delivery charges. It, you know, has to be for, it's not hot, you know, seeds that grow that food, no tobacco, alcohol, you know, easy to find the list of foods that are purchasable with SNAP. I saw Lindsay putting up the farmers market tokens. The rules for farmers markets, basically it sounds like your farmers market is stretching the rules a little bit. But the only category that is allowed to use tokens or script is farmers markets. You know, they're trying to follow a model where you're getting your payment is accepted when your food is provided. Otherwise, you run into issues where folks run up a bill and then owe you. So some of these are like consumer protection focused. You don't really want people to run up a tab and then you're able to take their SNAP funds later on. Also, they don't want you to like hoard their SNAP money and then they're forced to go to you in the future. If you go the voucher route, you don't need an EBT machine at all. They'll send you a free wired machine and then you just like throw it in the closet.
Any other questions out there? Did I catch them all in the chat? I think so. Any other questions while we have Bryan here?
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. Is it possible, now that I'm a direct farm retailer, will it cause a problem or is it against the rules if I accept payments from my online farm stand where I sell from other producers?
No, it's not. It's not well defined. So I just don't think that you'll have an issue because you're flying under the radar. You're such small fish to fry, but they don't really define how much of the mix has to come from land that you're grown. And they actually haven't written rules since the last farm bill was passed, which really expands the ability of farmers to sell via SNAP. When you're selling farm direct, you can actually accept payment way in advance, like months in advance. There is no limit to how far you can accept payment in advance when you're a farm direct retailer. But don't argue that point with USDA because you're just creating trouble for yourself. But the rules don't say it has to be provided within a certain amount of time.
We have one more question from Marissa.
That was a perfect bridge into my question. Thank you. We're not a farm direct. We're technically a brick and mortar retail. And I'm trying to set up a program with a local pig farmer on doing a payment plan for SNAP shoppers to pay for half or whole pig. I was curious if if there was any rules against, like if a SNAP customer prepaid 5 months in a row and then got their half a pig after that, if that was breaking any rules since they are payment, they want to get food right away from that.
Yeah, so the only time you're supposed to be allowed to accept payment in advance is if you're a farmer, in which case there is no time limit. Although the USDA has written a letter saying it's 2 weeks, or your nonprofit cooperative buying club, in which case you can accept payment 2 weeks in advance. Again, you're just going to fly under the radar. And, if the worst case is that you would have to refund the money or stop the practice like in the future. So I would just encourage you to do that. So.
Thank you. Do you know if there's any instance of if you break the rules where they revoke your SNAP privileges? Because that's, I think, what we're all kind of worried about in doing these like creative solution things.
Yeah. In my experience, when we ran into trouble with FNS is that they ask you to stop doing the practice immediately, but they don't like revoke your approval to accept payment. So I think that, mainly when this is going to come into play is like in issues of fraud. We're just not committing fraud. So revoke your approval until you argue otherwise. I think they will just issue a warning.
Great. Is there any last question, or did we cover our SNAP needs? Bryan, thank you so much for your time. I think this was really helpful for us in understanding. My big takeaway, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is our goal is to fit ourselves into the retailer box and to be as narrow in our language and not think about the other ways that we're doing things. But we are a retailer, even though many of us are driving it out and dropping off the box on the porch. But when we're thinking about ourselves in terms of SNAP, we are a retailer. That is the most simple way forward for most of us. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's just funny because I know all of you, like your minds are constantly innovating and thinking about all these great ideas. But when it comes to FNS, that's a downside. So
just narrow down how we describe ourselves to retailer, because we are not lying. We have brick and mortars and we are retailing Just some of our folks, are picking up somewhere else, some other brick and mortar. Some of our folks are getting delivery. Some of our folks are coming to our spaces, but we are retailers.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. You have no idea how much it has helped us to circle our way through all of this language and understand how to describe ourselves. So this is hugely helpful. Thank you, Bryan.
Cool. Yeah, thanks a lot. And if you get stuck in the future, give me a call or send me an email. Cindy's got all my contact info.
Great. Thanks, y'all. Thanks everybody for participating in this call. It's been a really big one and my head is full. I'm sure yours is as well. I think this was super helpful, both the worker safety and SNAP, and we'll see you in a month. Bye, y'all.